Howdy folks, and welcome to another technical tutorial on the IBM BPM product. In this edition, we're going to look at a concept known as dynamic preview, and this relates to coaches and custom coach views and what your screen looks like when you're designing coaches using the Web Process Designer or Web PD environment. Now, in my story here, I want to create myself a brand new low-level coach view. Now, what that coach view does isn't important. And so what I've done is I've created a very simple coach view called My Box. And what My Box does is it draws a box on the screen. And in the properties of my coach view, I've got a foreground and a background color, and that allows me to color my box. Well, that's all very good. Nice, simple UI component. And the logic to implement this can be found here. This is the logic, and it's incredibly simple. I'm not going to go into great detail on it because that's not important to the subject of this tutorial video. Suffice it to say, it creates a div element and then sets the background and foreground color in that div element and sets the label given to this coach view as text in that label. That's all very good. What I want to focus on, however, is what it looks like when we are building a coach. So here's my coach, and let's put in a text box just to show that this is just an empty coach, a regular text box. There we go. Now, because I've created a new type of coach view called My Box, I can drag and drop that in here. And here is the default look and feel of my coach view. Well, it's not very pretty, but let's try change some properties on it. Let's go to its configuration. Let's set the foreground, the background color to be yellow and the foreground color to be blue. Tab away, and notice nothing changes. Still a box, so it's still labeled as a box, but nothing changed. Let's change the label on it. Let's say it's My Label, and still nothing changes on it. So what that means is that even though I've created a coach view, its visual representation in Process Designer is nothing more than a square. And this would be true even if this wasn't a My Box coach view. If this was something fancy like a date picker or something else, this is what the coach view would look like in the environment in Process Designer. That's okay, but it's not very good. And if I was to play this, here is what the box looks like when I play it. This is what it looks like at runtime, and this is what it looks like during development time. As you can see, they're not the same thing. So what can we do about this? What can we do about this? In the Web PD environment, there's a relatively new capability to be able to provide what's called an advanced preview. And the advanced preview is where we can define a fragment of HTML and or JavaScript that gets executed during development time. It gets executed in the context of the Web PD Process Designer. So what that means is that if we craft it properly, the visual representation of your custom coach view can look better in Process Designer to give you an almost what you see is what you get based development experience. So what that means is not only can we inject the coach views, but we can set characteristics and properties of them which will take effect during development time. Now, the Process Designer WebPD documentation goes into copious detail on what a class or JavaScript class or object would look like in order to make it take advantage of it. Now, rather than try and code that up in front of you, here is my pre-created effort, and we will talk about this. So the high level is that if you're going to do dynamic preview in your WebPD environment, you create yourself a JavaScript file. The name of it is not important. That JavaScript file then gets added into your project or your toolkit containing your new custom coach view. And then in your what's the word I want to say? In your advanced preview section, we come over here, we select the my box JS file, and we have now associated this custom coach view to be rendered at development time using the JavaScript. And I'll come back to shortly. I'll show you more of the JavaScript, but let me save this. Let me go back here and notice immediately it's taken effect. So this is my development time. This is not runtime. And if I come over here now and change some of the characteristics, let's say the background color is now going to be, oh, I don't know, brown. Let's see if we've got a color called brown. There we go. And the foreground color is yellow. Awesome. And as we see, the representation within the development environment now is now cognizant of the characteristics which I'm editing during development or composition time. So this development perspective I'm seeing here, if I play this at runtime, they're going to look almost identical. So the story here is that during development time, I am not constrained into a model which doesn't show me what the final result looks like. If I spend a bit of time on my coach views, I can have those coach views react in the context of Process Designer. So let's look at what it takes to do something like that. Now, the interface is not, in my opinion, the most elegant. You have to create a JavaScript object which apparently has to be called, literally called, mix object. And that's what's in the documentation. So you create an object called mix object, and in your object, in your JavaScript object, you create two properties, one called create preview and one called property changed, both of which are functions. So these are the lifecycle callback functions which are called by Process Designer during the Process Designer's rendering of your custom coach view. Now, create preview is called to generate or build the element in the Process Designer screen which is responsible for rendering your coach view. You get passed in the containing div, which is the division or the HTML division, which owns this area of real estate, and it's up to you to populate it. So for my box, what I do is I create a div, set its height, flex container to make it aligned, and then append that as a child of the containing div. You're also passed a function called callback, which you are responsible for calling at the end of the creation of your rendered coach view. That allows you to do asynchronous work in here such that the component isn't necessarily rendered until you call callback. The property changed function is called whenever you change the configuration properties of your custom coach view. So for example, when I set my background to be, for example, blue, that causes the property change callback to occur. In this case, it was the background color property, and what I do is I change the style on my created div element so that it takes that effect. Now obviously I chose my box merely to be illustrative. My box is not a particularly functional or useful coach view, but as you build your own coach views with richer and richer functions, you can make those dynamic. An example of one is the concept of the modal section. So this is one of the Spark UI components. We bring in a modal section, and this represents a dialog box. Now this modal section is itself styled to be dynamic. If I click on it, it opens up, and then we can drag and drop various components into this modal section here, and I can collapse it again. So we see here an example of a professional coach view which is taking advantage of dynamic styling, dynamic preview within the Process Designer environment. So what I really wanted to show you in this short tutorial video was an example of creating your own simple dynamic preview custom coach view helper class by creating this JavaScript file, which then when run generates a mix object, which then gets added to the context of this coach view in the context of Process Designer. The Process Designer application provided by IBM will invoke your supplied function callbacks in order to process the rendering so that your custom coach view looks like it will in production. Alright, I hope you found something useful in this, guys, and I look forward to more of these videos in the future. Bye for now.